Good morning. We are live and we are back in the home church. Always good to be back here, but it's also good to be blessed with the opportunity to share the Word of God with others. Last week was kind of a last minute thing. Pastor I had met last year is having back problems, so be praying for Brother Matthew down there at Orville Baptist Church. Good bunch of folks down there, very, very kind and gracious, allowing me to fill in for their pastor, and always an honor. Which next Sunday I'll be back at Enterprise Baptist Church up here, over in Cottondale. And then I'll be back here the Sunday after that. And then the Sunday after that, on 26th, I'll be back at Enterprise again. So I've got 2 Sundays coming up, but right now it's every other Sunday. So like I said, next week, I'll be over there at Enterprise Baptist. Same thing again. The Sunday school lesson will be the sermon. The week after that, I'll be back here in-house as far as I know. I'm also going to be filling in over at Old Blue Creek on the 15th, which is a Wednesday night. So I was able to make sure I had the night off to do that, to cover for Roscoe. So be praying for me. I'm exhausted, and you got anything you want me to pray for you about, drop a comment, send me a message. My niece Mabry is being baptized this morning over at Coling Baptist, so definitely be in prayer for her and her family. That's a big step. Always good to see that kind of a thing. So Sharon is over there supporting that. And we're going to get into chapter 11, Book of Hebrews, chapter 11. And so, I keep recapping everything, right? So Jesus is better than everybody and everything we've got down here, right? That's the first 9 chapters of Hebrews, is the explanations as to why he's better, and that he is a continual, constant, perfect sacrifice, able to go before the most holy of holies, even more holy than anything we could ever possibly have here on earth. And of course, that's the throne room of God in heaven. But he died once and for all. And I saw this morning, I don't know how old the recording is, but it's current Pope Francis giving a speech in whatever language it was in, Latin or Italian or something. And he basically said that Christ dying on the cross was a failure. I guess the fact that he was killed somehow works into that equation, but it flies in the face of everything Paul's saying here in Hebrews. The fact that Christ defeated death, hell, and the grave because he was crucified and then resurrected shows victory over death. So even though that might have been a momentary defeat to have been crucified, it was prophetic. It had to happen in order for him to be resurrected, which then allows him to go and intercede on our behalf before God, right? I mean, that's everything we've been talking about. And so for someone to say that Christ's death on the cross was a failure is an absolute blasphemous statement. It is heretical. It is unbiblical. And it shows a very warped humanist ideology at the root of whatever that person believes. So take that as you will. I don't say that to attack Roman Catholics, because anytime you question the Pope, you're attacking Roman Catholicism, which it shouldn't be like that, but it is. But that's what the man said. It's on video. It's been translated, and it's not ambiguous. It's not well, he could have said, or he might have said. No, he flat out said Christ failed on the cross. And it's like, well, what does that have to do with Hebrews chapter 11? And it's we have to have faith. And this is one of the most famous, most popular verses in the Bible, Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. So, faith is the substance of things hoped for and not yet seen, as it says in the King James. I read through several different versions. They all say the same thing. They might use a couple different words. The assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. In other words, promises. God's promises, and this is what Paul's going to explain here. God's promises to his followers. And so if God says he's going to do something, he's going to do it. And we have to have faith that he will keep his promises. So our whole entire religion, every religion period is based on faith, and whether it's faith in lies or faith in truth. In this case, for us as Christians, it's faith in the truth. And we have a consistent standard by which to say that. Everybody says that their faith is true, but who has the consistent standard to back that up? Christianity does. Judaism and Judeo-Christian beliefs have the standard of the Bible. We're talking about 4,000 years of collective writings, 6,000 plus years, give or take a few, dozen years or so, worth of history of the earth, of creation. And so what we have is consistent. It's not been made up in the last 2,000 years. It's not been made up in the last 1,500 years like Islam. It's not been made up in the last 500 years like Mormonism. It's a continuous story that has been written down for the last 4,000 years. And we continually keep finding scroll after scroll through archaeological research to just shore up that faith that we have. Not that we have to have it, but more and more stuff comes to light, right? So faith is assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen, for by it the people of old received their commendation. By faith we understand that the universe was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible or things that are unseen. And I had to kind of think about this for a little while just to really wrap my head around exactly what that's saying. And especially in light of science that we have today, where we're able to actually, electron microscopes and stuff are able to zoom in so far down to the atomic level, and we can see the atoms, and they've actually discovered the God particle, as they call it. And they've actually seen where the motion of the electrons and the neutrons actually forms the shape of a cross. It's really cool. More and more faith, more and more things to confirm our faith that there is a creator, and that, that God is that creator, and that he actually created everything. So, lovely, Facebook, trying to reconnect. Anyway, so our faith is not based on nonsense. It's not based on our imagination. It is based on reality. And so what does it mean to have things that are not? The unseen has created what is seen. If you go back to some of my previous lessons, if you're into apologetics at all, and of course I'm drawing a blank, is the cosmological argument for the existence of God. God can't be made of time because he created time. God can't be made of matter because he created matter. God can't be made of space because he created space. So he's timeless, spaceless, he's matterless. In other words, he has to exist outside of our reality. And so it's the very hand of God that created the universe. And we have to have faith in that, because we don't actually, we have the written word of God that tells us that, but it's something we have to choose to believe, and that's part of our faith. And when you begin to say that you can have the Big Bang Theory, for instance, I don't ascribe to that at all. I don't subscribe to it. I don't feel like that there's any truth to the Big Bang. It's a theory. I don't agree with or like when, well, God said bang and it happened. We don't know. It's not recorded. The word bang is not anywhere in the first chapter of Genesis. We know that God spoke things into existence, and does bang translate into let there be light? No. But we have to have faith that something greater than the universe itself created the universe. It's just, and that's a logical statement. That's not an illogical thing to say. People who deny that are illogical, but it still takes, it's a faithful statement. Now, I will say this, it takes even more faith to say that the universe just popped into existence from absolutely nothing. There's no logic at all to that. That's just imaginative gobbledygook to try and explain away God. But, again, you walk out and somebody had to build your car. It didn't just miraculously evolve from dirt and metal and wood. It's, rubber and whatever. Your car didn't assemble itself. Somebody built it, and you didn't see the builder. Unless you work in the factory. I work in automotive manufacturing for a tier 1 supplier for a major automotive corporation, and we're building the bumpers, we're building the parts, whatever pieces and panels and stuff. We're building those things, and then somebody over at the end user is putting that onto a car. But the final person who goes and buys that off the car lot is never going to see all that. They have no idea who I am. They have no idea who anybody else that I work with is. And nor do they care, and they shouldn't. It's a car. You hope that it's built well, and if you pay what you're paying for it, you hope that it's good quality. But again, somebody had to build your car. Let's see here. So chapter 11, verse 4. By faith, Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain, which he was commended as righteous, God commending him, accepting his gifts. And through his faith, though he died, he still speaks. We have the recorded. So a commendation in this is, in other words, there's testimony as to Abel's faithfulness. The fact that his sacrifice was accepted and his heart was in the right place and he properly worshiped God, so that his worship, his sacrifice was accepted, whereas Cain's was not. So, even though he's dead, but we still have a recording of what he did and why he did. So he's still able to speak through his sacrifice, through his death. He's still able to continue to speak because of the testimony, because God saw fit to have Moses write this down in the book of Genesis. So we still are able to know that there's proper and acceptable sacrifices made unto God, and there's ones that aren't, right? So Abel's was accepted, Cain's was not. Verse 5, by faith Enoch was taken up so that he shall not see death, and he was not found because God had taken him. Now before he was taken, he was committed as having pleased God. You go back to Genesis chapter 5, verse 24. Enoch, he walked with God and he was no more. God took him. He's walking with God and they walked off. And that's wow. To be so faithful and to be so righteous, to be like that with God, that he would preserve you from death, and could be a possible reason for that in the future, potentially. We don't really know. We just know that he had enough faith to be righteous enough unto God that God accepted him and took him off someplace. I mean, that's to be able to be in the presence of God requires definitely an amount of righteousness. In order to be righteous, you got to be able, you have faith that why you're being righteous is even worth it. But again, it's recorded. We have testimony as to the fact that he did this. So here, verse 6, and without faith it is impossible to please him, for whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. So without faith it is impossible to please him. You can't just go through the motions. You can't just, check all your checklists. I said this many prayers. I put this many dollars in the plate as it came by. I spent this many hours watching or attending services. I spent this many hours feeding the homeless. You can't just sit there and just see, look, I did this list. It's time for me to go be in the presence of God because I earned my way up there, right? But even to get to that point where and that's a misguided point. It's by faith. It's by grace through faith, not of works, lest any man should boast, right? We have to have faith in the God that we're doing things for, that there will be a reward for those things. And I'm not saying that you can earn your salvation, not what I'm saying here. But to be considered righteous, we have to do the right things. To be considered faithful, we have to take those steps of faith and actually believe that God is real and that God created the universe and that God is the ultimate judge and the ultimate standard. So we have to have faith in those ideas in order for our worship to actually be accepted. If we have no faith, then we're just going through the motions, and that's not going to be acceptable to God. We'll stand before God, and He'll look at you and say, "Depart from me, I never knew you." And we certainly don't want that to happen. But we have to have faith to please Him, and if we're going to draw near, we have to believe that God exists. There's so many people out there would say that God doesn't exist. I don't see how. I say that. I did as a young teenager. I felt like God didn't exist, but it was because of all the circumstances around me kind of just, I didn't see the good things that were there. I wasn't looking for them. I wasn't looking at them. And so I had a hard time. My parents were divorced and all this other, so I had a hard time reconciling what had happened to me in my life. And there was, perspective and learning as you get older, and it's realizing that there's people out there who have it far worse than I ever did. Certainly allows me to have a better perspective and to step back and go, wow. So but to learn and to see things and to see those times when, wow, maybe that should have gone another way, but it didn't, because there is a God, right? And so our life experiences can influence how we feel about that sort of thing. But when you start reading and studying and learning the Bible, at some point you do have to come to the conclusion that there is a God. And the Bible tells us, and we're able to learn, that He's a personable God, and He wants to actually be back in fellowship with us, and how He's not this impersonal, watchmaker. He's not the person building a car. I have no idea who's going to buy whatever car that has our parts on it. I have no idea who they are. Don't really care. As long as somebody buys it so we can continue to produce it and have a job. In the grand scheme of things, though, it really doesn't matter who buys it. we're going to build a quality part, and we're going to stick it on a car, hopefully a quality car, and hopefully somebody buys it. But in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter who. It just matters that somebody does. And so that's a very impersonal thing. And it really, the person who ends up with the car doesn't care who put the parts on it. As long as they did it right. They don't care. They don't know who you are. They don't want to know who you are. They want to go to the dealership, buy their fancy car, and then go off down the road. And that's fine. But we're not talking about, some grand hoo-ha figure that is building a car. We're talking about the creator of the universe. In fact, that the creator of the universe wants to be in fellowship with us. That's the whole point of the whole entire exercise here from start to finish, is for us to be in fellowship with God and wanting to actually worship him because he's worthy of it. Not just because he says he wants it or demands it, but because he's actually worthy of it and is the only one who truly can demand that we worship him because of his worthiness. But we have to have faith to be able to do any of that. Let's see here, verse 7. By faith, Noah, being warned by God concerning events as yet unseen, in reverent fear constructed an ark for the saving of his household. By this he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. You imagine sitting there and looking at, you're sitting there and everybody around you is just behaving in God knows what manner, which we're moving in that direction. Look at our college campuses right now. You got all kinds of whack jobs out there running around, protesting this and protesting that, and it's absolutely, some of the videos I've seen talking about the conditions within these occupied buildings and stuff are absolutely disgusting. But they claim like they have some sort of moral authority or superiority to be able to do such a thing. But it's, when you're watching all of this sinfulness around you, and to not participate is one thing, but then for God to speak to you and say, hey, I want you to go out and build a big boat, go build this big structure and lock yourself in it because I'm going to flood the earth. It's going to rain. You're sitting there going, what rain? It never rained up to that point. Something really interesting, the samples of what they believe to be Noah's Ark, it's been found, and the wood that they have taken and sampled from this doesn't have growth rings, which has something to do with seasons. So you have, as the bark and stuff of a tree grows and it gets bigger, it adds more layers of bark to it and all that, and you have different seasons that affect those rings, and that's why you're able to see all the rings. And apparently this wood sample that they've taken has no rings in it. So that's really interesting. But again, having enough faith to believe God and build something like that, and then the animals show up, and which is even more confirmation, and then to actually experience that and to go through the flood and to come out the other side of it, and the ultimate promise of everything is promises further down the road. At that time, it was hey, build this boat and put your family in it and take 2 of every animal and you'll survive. And not only is that a real thing that actually happened, it is also metaphorical for our belief in Christ. So Christ is our ark to save us from destruction. Let's see here. All right, so verse 8, by faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith he went to live in the land of promise as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. By faith, Sarah herself received power to conceive even when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised. So, I said this a long time ago, and probably about genealogy studies, but Abraham took the leap of faith so that you and I could take a step. And it really, honestly, you probably could go back before that and say that Noah took the leap of faith. And build a boat. It's going to rain, dude. What's rain? I don't know. I've never heard of rain. What's a boat? I mean, why do we need boats? And so, God instructed him on how to do it. And that took a tremendous amount of faith. But certainly for Abraham, to leave everything behind and to march out into the wilderness with his family is a tremendous amount of faith. And of course, that is certainly, it's not the beginning, but it's that demarcation point that leads us to the Israelites, that leads us to Jesus, that leads us to salvation. So Abraham certainly is regarded as this tremendous figure, and he should be regarded as a good example of faith. Now, again, as Paul has already said, Jesus is better than Abraham. But Abraham is promised descendants that you can't count, but he had no son. I mean, he was promised to have this great nation come from him, but his wife is barren. And so he had to have faith in that. And I think there were times when he had to be reminded of his faith. Go back and read about Abraham in the book of Genesis. There were several times he needed to be reminded of his faith. That was the whole point of him taking Isaac up to be sacrificed, is to remind him of his faith and that God will provide, and to continue to trust in him. But it's faith. Belief that things will happen as God says they will happen. I mean, and Sarah initially laughed it off. She thought it was she didn't know. She didn't think it could happen. But God is faithful, and he told her it would happen. And then, she was able to conceive, through whatever trials and tribulations they went through to get her to that point where she had enough faith, and she was at that ready, prime spot for her to believe, and for God to bless her as he did, to keep his word to Abraham. But again, you have to have faith. Somebody comes along and promises you something, you got to have faith that they're going to fulfill the promises. And as humans, we fail miserably. We don't keep our promises. We lie about things. And so we're unreliable as a whole. Now, it doesn't mean that people aren't, it doesn't mean the individuals aren't unreliable. But at some point in time, some individual human person is going to let you down. At some point. Now, how many times they do it? Can you trust them? Do you want to keep on trusting them? Who knows? But God is not a human, and God's not going to let us down. So verse 12, therefore from one man and him as good as dead were born descendants as many as the stars of heaven and as many as the innumerable grains of the sand by the seashore. So God kept his promises, and Abraham never saw the promised land. He never saw the final city here on earth. He didn't. He saw his son and he saw his grandsons, possibly some of his great grandsons, but he had no way of knowing or imagining that it would be what it is today. So God keeps his promises, and if you and I are faithful, if we do what he says to go out and make disciples and tell others about the gospel, the good news of Christ's resurrection, if we do those things, then he's going to be faithful to us and keep his promises because we're faithful to him. So join me next week for second installment of chapter 11. God bless, and I'll see you next time.